Should we start?
Yep, cool. Hello everyone, thanks for coming tonight. I'm Jake from Cycle Station. As you all may know, Tom from Osteohealth, Mr. Tom Barry, very famous local celebrity, is now doing bike fits in the back corner of the store here a couple of days a week, which was a couple months in the cooking. We thought it'd be a good idea for us to have somebody who knows what they're talking about more than us with those special high-end road triathlon mountain bike fits. And I think Tom appreciated having access to parts, mechanics, bikes, all sorts of stuff. The Guru machine, which comes in handy now and then. So Tom wanted to have a bit of a chat tonight about triathlon stuff, which he knows lots about. Got a few gold cups in the closet, do you?
No, not for triathlon. I think anyone who's seen me do a triathlon knows full well that my specialty lies in talking about it, not about doing it.
A few qualifications anyway.
I think it is. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'll pass it on to Tom and I'll bring out a box and you can all put your names down to go on the draw to win the Stages Power Meter, which Tom's sponsored for tonight. And I'll start bringing drinks and food around in a minute. Cool.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you for hosting us tonight and thanks for having me in the shop. It has been a good experience moving in here. The access to equipment is something that I just couldn't get my hands on where I was, and obviously the scale and size of everything is just extraordinary, so it's been really good. And I no longer have to sit there with a hacksaw and cut expensive carbon bits in my clinic, which is also a good upside. So today we thought we'd talk about obviously triathlon, given who we've got here. Very Briefly, Osteohealth is our business. It's down on the corner of North and David Street. We've been going for about 13 or 14 years now. We've got 6 osteos, 2 physios, a hand therapist and a Pilates instructor, which has been great. So we've got a really good crew of people down there. I think that's pretty much everything there. Righto. So I guess we'll cut to the chase. A lot of you have seen me and met me before. For those who haven't, who am I and what would I know? It's a very profound question, that one. Basically, I'm an exceptional athlete. I look really good in a skin suit, which is something we'll be speaking about later tonight. In reality, I'm an osteopath, so 5-year double degree down in Melbourne, and also prior to that I did a science degree at Melbourne Uni where I majored in anatomy and exercise physiology. So the coupling of kind of those disciplines with bike fitting has been fantastic, and it's allowed me to indulge in some of my more nerdy tendencies. We began cycling analysis and bike fitting as we realised the limitation of treating patients, and quite a few of you here are patients. We realised the limitation of treating people without actually being able to assess them on the bike, because clearly bike positional stuff has a significant impact on how people feel, what their injury state is, and ultimately their performance as well. We're probably going to leave a lot of the injury or the more significant kind of injury aspect of what we do out of it tonight. I think it's pretty well understood that we try and set people up so that they don't get injured, and that's probably the primary goal that we look for, and then after that everything cascades off the back of that. But if there are any questions about this sort of stuff, obviously very happy to speak to you about it. Over the 8 or 9 years we've worked with multiple national champions, time trial, road race, criterium champions, lots of NRS stage winners, so lots of road cyclists, a lot of triathletes who we've had go across to Hawaii and into the World Championships recently, one of whom is sitting over in the corner here. Lots of regular cyclists, elite cyclists, and the ones that we particularly like are cyclists with relatively high needs. And by that we mean they either want to be elite, or they're injured, or they've got other sorts of biomechanical deficiencies that we can assist them with to help overcome that. Obviously I've ridden a bike on occasion. That's one of the very, very few times I've stood on a podium and collected the flowers with the podium girls, and this is a very rare, this is like seeing a Yeti, so a very rare glimpse of me running at one of the local sprint tries. So there's probably not a lot of points searching for the results here because I was a long way down the results sheet, but I do know what it feels like to come out of a swim and get on a bike, and it is a very, very different it's a very different ability than just getting on a bike and going flat out, so which is what I do most of the time. There's a few rules for tonight. Ask questions. It's a really nice sized group. There's plenty of scope for people to ask questions. It's far more interesting to have other voices speaking rather than my nasal twang. So please, if anyone has questions, regardless of what they are, ask. The numbers that we speak about are relatively general. So whether something is 72% and whether it's or 75% is kind of irrelevant. What we're looking at here more is the principle of the matter. So the numbers are about right. They don't apply individually to everyone. And of course, there's not cumulative gains. You can't just add 4% here, 4% here, 4% there and get 12%. It doesn't quite work that way. But certainly the numbers are relatively accurate. And I have references for all of these if anyone is interested in getting them at some point. But yeah, concentrate on the principle, don't fixate on the actual numbers. Tonight will be relatively triathlete specific. Triathlon is a really specialised discipline, which sounds kind of funny given that it's multiple disciplines within one. But the act of actually being a triathlete across all three phases is what we're actually about. Of course, tonight we'll focus on the bike element of that because that's obviously my area of expertise. We do deal with swimmers and we do deal with runners and those sorts of things, but I certainly don't claim any great expertise in speaking about that. The reason why tries are so specific are they are non-drafting, so there's no real requirement to sit on someone's wheel. The really unique aspect is obviously having to get off the bike and run, and that's something that we're really adamant about. Oftentimes people will commit to a really aggressive position, but what they're ultimately doing is compromising their ability to run off the bike. We see it all the time, and it's something that people need to be really conscious of. And of course, the fastest bike split doesn't end up equaling the fastest triathlon, so it's across all the disciplines. And realistically, in terms of pacing and riding and so on, in triathlon, the bike is very much a way of getting from the swim to the run as fresh and as fast as possible. It's a real razor's edge, which is why I bang on so much about power data, just having the objective ability to actually quantify what you're doing. It's very easy to overcook a bike split. It's also very, very easy to leave time on the course. And that's something that we all work very hard trying to increase our power and trying to increase our fitness. And when we leave time on the course or we go too hard and blow the run, that's it's a waste of training, and it's avoidable for the most part. As I said, tonight is bike dominant, which is fairly straightforward. Right, so we're going to be talking about a few things. Anything you want me to, just because I'm kind of a people pleaser, so feel free to ask. How do we get more speed, which I think is ultimately what everyone's after. How do we buy more speed, because they're two separate things. You can purchase speed. Time trialling and triathlon riding is very much an arms race. Typically, the more money you spend, the faster you will go. There are lots of things you can do to try and minimise the impact of cost on what you're doing. But fundamentally, it's an expensive sport, and the more you spend, the faster you're going to go. Is there any such thing as free speed? And there certainly is. And then basically the bike fitting principles of triathlon. And there's always some physics with what I talk about. So again, if it gets too nerdy or boring, then let me know. And ultimately course management as well. So that's the, whoops, I've put this in the wrong order. Right, so how do we go faster on the bike? Number one is more power. This is a really misunderstood term, and we'll speak about this later, but it's pretty self-evident. If you've got a bigger engine, you're probably going to go faster. In fact, you almost certainly will go faster. This was a self-portrait this morning.
You weren't wearing salmon shorts?
No, I wasn't in the salmon today.
Just grab a couple of these seats for people who are at the back.
So we're going to grab these seats. The second option is to reduce drag. So again, drag is often misunderstood and misinterpreted. It is incredibly difficult to quantify drag, and anyone who says that they're reducing drag when they put you in a certain position, they are being, well, they're dissembling at best. So drag cannot be quantified well outside of a wind tunnel. There's lots of models you can do, and there's lots of ways you can run numbers and figures, but the reality is we have some basic principles around drag and about drag reduction, but realistically, for me to sit in that room and tell you that that position is going to make you faster, that's just not the case. It will probably make you faster, hopefully it'll make you faster, but it's such a complex interaction of shapes, moving parts, wind, road surfaces, all sorts of things that realistically we can't say that we're going to reduce your drag. And then ultimately course management, so that's, I think this man is like Jesus on a bike. Bradley Wiggins is probably the best thing that's ever got on a bike in terms of time trialling of all time. He is magnificent. So if you ever want to ride a bike well, look at Brad Wiggins. But then the third part to this, how do we go faster on the bike, is course management. So if your drag numbers are relatively fixed, and of course they're not, but if they are fixed, and if your power is effectively fixed, which it will be on any given day, just because fitnesses will be what it will be, there's a lot of things you can do around course management that will make a difference to your overall time and your speed. So for any given power, depending on where you apply it across the course, will dictate how fast you are going. Most people will overpace on the climbs, and they will go too soft off the back of hills and on the flats. They will eat and drink in the wrong spot of the course, and ultimately that leaves them leaving time out on the road. And we'll have a look at a graph later on that will demonstrate why that's the case. It's really important where you eat, drink, and the fact that you can sustain your posture for an extended period of time. Righto. I've got some fantastic little puns and word plays in here. So obviously more power is what we're after. And what is power? It's a measure of work on a bike. It's measured in watts. It's the key metric for cycling or for triathletes anyway, is your functional threshold power. Basically that's a measure of your aerobic engine. Functional threshold power is in theory what you can hold for an hour, and everything cascades off this number. It's really important when people are trying to get the most out of themselves that you have objective measures that you can quantify things with, and ultimately what you can do is start to pace off that number. It is absolutely the number that you should be looking at in triathlon with bike splits. With the FTP, we can then get a really good look around whether your position is relatively fast, relatively slow. We've got some benchmarks around things, so we know that roughly for 300 watts, 40 kilometers an hour is probably par. So if you can average 40 k's an hour at 300 watts, you've got a relatively good position. If you're getting less than 40 k's an hour on a flat course, then your position probably needs to be looked at. And if you're going faster than that, then you're doing a really good job. I won't mention names, but there's some people around here who get unbelievable speed from relatively low power. They've just got amazing positions, they pace things perfectly, and they're obviously the guys towards the front of the pack. Yeah, there's a real art to it, and there's a real skill in getting the most from your power. I think that power is also slightly misrepresented. People think power is the ability to lift something heavy. In terms of triathlon speak, we probably shouldn't talk about power as in power. It should be more around fatigue resistance. It is not hard to hit 300 watts. Anyone riding a bike through the store and accelerating the corner will hit 300 watts. The real genius is holding that 300 watts for an extended period of time. And so there's guys in Hawaii on the weekend who are going to be averaging over 300 watts, which is just extraordinary. And so yes, their ability is in resisting fatigue rather than generating power. And there's a saying we have basically that if I can jump from here onto that chair, I've got enough power to win the Tour de France. It's just I need to do it 250,000 times, and I'd need to lose about 8 kilos too. So fatigue resistance is key. And the way you generate fatigue resistance is through work, hard work over an extended period of time. There's a cumulative effect to training over time that ends up increasing people's ability to increase their FTP. And there's no cheap or easy way to get it. It is just hours and years and clever training. And typically, the more power you have and the longer you can hold it, the faster you're going to go. Righto, so what? Well, power is objective. We love objective measures in things. The more objectivity we can have, the better. So there's other metrics which people use, speed, which is really flawed because obviously if you're out there riding now, it's going to be slower because it's wet. Depending on wind conditions, depending on all sorts of things, speed will fluctuate. RPE is rate of perceived exertion. How does it feel? Does it feel like you're going hard? Well, I can assure you when I'm out doing efforts at 6 a.m. in the morning, it feels really hard to do 280 watts. Yet when you're in a bunch or you're riding along in a time trial where you're hyper-stimulated, 280 watts feels like nothing. And when you accelerate off the start line, 280 watts, you look at it and go, oh, I've got to go harder than that. It's just not enough. And so rate of perceived exertion is really variable, depending on how much sleep you've had, depending on all sorts of things. It's the same with heart rate. Heart rates drift depending on fatigue levels, depending on training state, depending on all sorts of stuff. So this is the reason why we love watts. A watt is a watt today, it will be a watt tomorrow, and it'll be a watt in 1,000 years. So it's really objective, it doesn't change over time. And if we can fix some of these variables, then we can start to play with the others to get the best out of ourselves. So that's why we love wattage as opposed to heart rate and rate of perceived exertion. Any questions about that? Can you tell that I like watts? Combined with other objective metrics, you can quantify performance exactly. So we won't speak about power to weight tonight because realistically in triathlon you very rarely have any great need to have a high power to weight. It will come as a function of having high power and from a lean body mass, but the reality is you're not really climbing any significant hills, and I exclude Port Macquarie and a few other ones. There's always hills and things, but really anything over 4% is when you start to talk about watts per kilogram. Anything under 4%, it's really not that big a deal. So what we're talking about more is watts versus drag. So your coefficient of drag, how aerodynamic are you? And ultimately, if you can't measure something, you can't improve it. So that's one of the first things that people talk about in almost everything they do. If you measure it, you'll start improving it. How do I get more power? Lance Armstrong had a lot of power. I don't endorse his techniques or methodologies, although his training was pretty good as well, not to mention his extracurricular activities. So riding more. So the bike split is roughly 50% of the time spent in a triathlon, give or take, up or down. It'll vary a little bit. It's an enormous percentage of the time in the triathlon. If you can improve things slightly in the bike, it's going to have a significant impact on your overall time because of the length of time that you're doing it. So I'm clearly biased, but cycling, well, the stats show that cycling is the most important part of triathlon. And again, I'm very happy for people to debate that till the cows come home. For the sake of the discussion this afternoon, we'll say that given its percentage of time, it's important. How do you get more power? Get a coach. I cannot stress this enough. We have access to some really good coaches in Albury-Wodonga. There's one here. There's others who aren't here. I'm happy to name any or all of them. So obviously Joe Homer, Fab, Angus Harris has done a lot of work with cyclists in town, and he does some work with triathlons. I'm sure Sarah Dare, I think she's come in. I haven't met Sarah yet, but there she is. Getting a coach is invaluable. We are all prone to doing things that we like doing. The trouble with that is that doesn't improve performance. Improving performance is uncomfortable and challenging, and typically we won't make ourselves do that stuff. Having a coach objectively look at your data and objectively look at your performance is probably the single best bang for buck you can get in terms of increasing performance. I cannot stress this enough. Having someone look at your performance from outside, removing all other sites of bias that we all have, is going to make you better at what you do. And we've got some really good objective minds around that can help you with that kind of thing. They will talk to you about things like periodization, specificity, overload. All of these sorts of things are really important. The body is incredibly adaptable. We see it all day, every day at work with people's injuries and their compensatory patterns and things like this. The reality is the body adapts to stress. Stress is a good word. It's been demonized over time just because of the impact of stress on our lives. Stress is actually good. We're built to deal with it. And so what happens is you stress your body during training and it adapts to that training stress. If you don't keep on shifting the goalposts, you will plateau. It's not uncommon to see even elite cyclists who've been working with one coach for years swap coaches and start to have a dramatic increase in performance. It's not because the old coach was bad or the new one was better. It's simply that the training stimulus has now altered. It is really important to keep on shifting the goalposts. If you keep on doing the same rides every week at the same pace, you will end up going at the same speed. Cannot stress that enough. They will keep you accountable. It is very, very difficult. I don't think there's anyone here who's full-time as a triathlete. It is very difficult getting out of bed and going and swimming and going and running and going and riding throughout winter. having someone looking over your shoulder and kind of, they don't even have to poke you that hard, but just knowing that someone's looking at this stuff, it means you're far more likely to do it. So again, I won't bang on too much further, but getting a coach is probably the best way you can improve your performance. Has anyone got anything to add to that? Any of the coaches who are here, or?
There's probably a lot of online plans if you can't afford a coach. Even if you go to that and adapt to what you're doing, it's better than nothing. Although it's when you go to a coach, you get an individual program. They'll work with you one-on-one, but if you can't afford that because it's an expensive sport, look at some online plans, and at least it's something to keep you moving forward.
Coaches have social and emotional intelligence to adjust, or they should, to adjust your training to where you're at. Whereas an online training plan is obviously, in America they say cookie cutter, but it's obviously straight off the shelf. Yes, Jared?
Don't just go to one coach. Find someone who's actually comfortable either dealing with all their philosophy, fit with what you want to get out of it, actually ask the questions before you start working with them and make sure that what they're going to give you works with be it your daily schedule or what you want to get out of it. There's no point going to Tim Ferriss and getting in the same program as a group if he's training 30 hours a week, you've only got 8 hours to give type thing. So it's actually finding someone who can give you what you want in the time you've got to give.
Yep.
Otherwise there's no point. There's no point in getting someone who has to adapt their coaching philosophies to fit what you want.
Very good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
coaches specialise themselves. I sort of relate more to women and new people as opposed to maybe taking on someone like Jared Wild. I have no idea how to coach him.
I've got a few ideas.
They're quite specific.
Yeah.
And they should be honest enough to you to
Yep.
let you know that that's what they do.
And the other thing that I haven't put up here too is recovery. So recovery is really important. Triathletes are notorious for not recovering because of the 3 disciplines. It's a really fine line to walk with what you guys do, with work, with lives, all of those sorts of things. It's very difficult to get adequate recovery. And I think there can be a tendency to overtrain, just throw more volume and time at it. And that doesn't always get you out of a hole. It'll often put you in one. And the other one is consistency over years. None of these things that we're talking about happen tomorrow. There's no way to get free speed now, realistically, in terms of power anyway. You need to put in the time over years to do it. There's lots of physiological processes associated with this kind of stuff, but it all takes time, and slow, consistent, good behaviours over an extended period of time is what will create great performance. It's not doing a block of 12 weeks today and then not touching the bike until next tri season. It is slow, consistent, good behaviours. And then flexibility and strength training. So there's a lot of stuff you can do off the bike to make a difference on the bike. And we'll speak about that a little bit more later. And you can always use what you've got smarter. So you can put 300 watts out across the time trial course and average 40 k's an hour, or if you pace it appropriately, you can get 40.6 k's an hour. So all of these sorts of things matter, where you apply force and how much. Oh, carry on, Lee. Get involved.
Lee, we flew him in from England for tonight.
Okay, so to put things in perspective, 370 watts is half a horsepower. So I'm not sure, Jared's probably the closest guy to 370 watts here. So this is to hold for an hour. It's a really lot of power. So it's quite elite to hold this amount of power. So Brad Wiggins and those guys do roughly 450, 460. Cancellara used to do, so there's half a horsepower. So Cancellara, they used to say, did about 500, which is just off its head. It's ridiculous. Anyway, 370 watts is an awful lot of power for a human to produce, but it's still only 0.5 of a horsepower. And we're having people trying to go 43 k's an hour, 44 k's an hour with half a horsepower. We are a uniquely unaerodynamic structure, and we're trying to push it through the air at 43 or 4 or 5 k's an hour with half a horsepower. It's it's almost paradoxical. It shouldn't be able to happen, but obviously through the use of bikes and things like that, we can get it to work. But my point is, it isn't much power to try and go quite fast. So, how do we get that quick with that little power? The key is to reduce drag. Yeah, that's a selfie. That was from last night. Yeah, just a few wines with my friends. So clearly, that's a good visual gag. This is that's actually how you reduce drag. So I think everyone knows Taryn, who went to the World Championships recently and had a bronze medal at the National Time Trial Champs. She gets a lot of bang for buck. So she goes very fast for relatively little power, and her position is extraordinary. She also has spent an awful lot of time and effort manipulating her body to get into that posture and sustain it for the 2 hours 20 it takes her to do the 90k half Ironman split. It's really important to get in a good position that is sustainable. You'll keep hearing me talk about sustainability as we go on. It's important to remember this number as well, and we'll come back to that later. So drag is basically wind resistance. It's not that simple, but it will be for tonight. There's other things that factor into resistance on a bike, chain friction, tyre friction, all of those sorts of things, and they all matter. But basically, wind resistance is where it's at. As I mentioned before, predominantly triathletes are non-drafting, or they should be, and predominantly they ride on relatively flat courses. They're not riding up Mount Hotham typically. So therefore, we don't really worry about watts per kilo. I know people quote it at the top level, but for most people it should be power versus coefficient of drag. It shouldn't be watts per kilo. So 165 watts for a bike and a rider, you'll go 32 k's an hour roughly. That's 82% of your effort is to overcome aerodynamic drag. 285 watts for the same cyclist will get you to 40 k's an hour, and that's 87% of your effort is to overcome aerodynamic drag. So you can see where that 80 to 90% number is coming in now. Everything that you do in triathlon should be based around reducing your wind resistance. That's obviously if we fix power and everything else around it, but basically you need to be avoiding the wind. It is the core principle behind everything you do on a bike, and everything you do on the bike should be based around trying to reduce drag whilst obviously maintaining power. This is where it gets really nerdy, but basically drag is comprised of frontal surface area, so how much of me is presenting to the wind, what I am made of, as in skin obviously, and so air flowing over skin isn't a particularly aerodynamic thing, and then shape. What shape is it? Is it teardrop? Is it cylindrical? Is it all these sorts of things? All the bikes are built now, and particularly time trial bikes, are built around reducing the frontal area. So if you have a look at this bike, so this is Damien Gillard's bike, who's been kind enough to lend it to us for the evening. So if we look at that from the front, and this is fully kitted up for half Ironman, there is almost nothing showing. So he's done a really good job of obviously putting everything in a line. He hides it behind other stuff, which is pretty basic, and it comes up in a very unique shape. Jared's bike also, he's gone flat out with some of his stuff, removing front derailleurs and all this sort of thing, and it makes an incredibly slippery bike. The other thing you can notice with these bikes, obviously, and everyone's seen this stuff, so I'm not going to bang on about it too much, these profiles here, increasing the depth of that angle reduces drag because wind sticks to it longer and creates less turbulence. So again, all these are designed around reducing drag as much as you possibly can. Zip, when we talk about surface textures, Zip have got dimples on their wheels, which basically gets air to form in those pockets, and what happens is the air sticks to that surface, and then air flows faster over air than it does over a solid surface. So that's the theory behind that, and also the reason why people typically, notwithstanding the factor of heat, should be using textured skin suits. I know Santini have some here, but I think they're tri-suits, but they definitely have texture on it. So it's really important to look at those sorts of things, because if you're going to buy things and spend money on them, you may as well make sure they're faster than something else. So textures, shapes, and frontal area is really important to how fast you can go for any given power. Any input from the crowd about that?
Without getting super nerdy, does cadence have an impact on drag?
I'll say no, not for the sake of this discussion. It has an impact on efficiency, but there's very few people who are pedaling below 60 RPM or above 105 or 10. And I'm going to say for the sake of this discussion that that's probably not a major factor. Certainly there's ideal cadences for different people, and anything ranging from 80 to 100 is considered somewhat normal. Certainly for triathlon, you'd probably want to, again, you might want to err on the side of higher rather than lower cadence, just because it stops some use of muscle glycogen as opposed to, so you're glycogen sparing effectively so you can run better. And grinding a gear isn't typically great for joints, connective tissues and those sorts of things. Overcoming drag becomes progressively greater, a greater percentage of your power the faster you go. So it's harder in terms of absolute power to go from 35 to 40 k's an hour than what it was to go from 30 to 35 k's an hour. Does that make sense? So the faster you go, you should definitely be thinking more and more and more about your position. Equally, the longer you're out on course, and so this is where people who are often middle of the packers or going a bit slower, they'll talk about not wanting to wear, well, they call them sperm helmets, but time trial helmets. They'd rather not wear one of these because they think they're not going fast enough to use it. The problem is that they're spending more time on course, so drag has a greater gross amount of time to act on their performance than what it does for the elite guys. So the amount of time you're out there actually impacts on whether you should be wearing these things as well. And effectively, everyone who's doing a triathlon should be wearing an aero helmet. So whether it's one of these, there's lots and lots of different sorts. Doesn't matter what brand, it doesn't matter what, well, size matters, but basically in almost any given situation, an aero helmet is going to generate relatively free speed. It's good bang for buck because these helmets are $250. These are a bit more than that, but it's relatively good bang for buck because it will give you significant improved performance across the length of a half Ironman or an Olympic distance triathlon. You could go for one of those too. They're only 50 and they're on sale at the moment. And that will still be faster, much faster. It's probably a very quick helmet. It just looks a bit weird. I don't know any data on it, but it will be much faster than a road helmet or a road aero helmet. So I know lots of people have been using Specialized Evades and Bontrager Ballistas and lots of these kind of aero type of road helmets, and they are simply not as fast as what a proper aero helmet is.
How many minutes are you talking? Are you talking like a couple of minutes or seconds? Or
How far are you going?
like if you're doing a half Iron?
It's roughly 2 or 3 seconds per K for an aero helmet. So half Ironman, 180 seconds. Is that right? At a minimum. So that's 3 minutes. 3 to 5 minutes to, yep. So they definitely make a difference.
But you're not just talking about just the helmet then, Tommy. Like you're saying helmet plus this, that accumulates to maybe 10 or 12 minutes.
So if you,
Likely.
over time, for sure, with lots of cumulative things, but with those helmets alone, if you turned up on your road bike and you did it in a proper road helmet, a normal one, and did the 90 Ks, and you got on the same bike, maintained the same position and power in an aero helmet, you will get 2 or 3 minutes faster, possibly 4. So it makes a difference.
Tom, would it help if Simon rode his bike sideways?
I'm not sure if anything would help Simon. That's very hurtful, Simon. Yeah.
I've got a big head, so it doesn't matter.
For the helmet comes in handy.
That's right. So to go for, and this is also, all these things are incidental, so they're all based around you already getting coached and having good power. Like that is the fundamental to all this stuff. To go faster, you need to train smarter, reduce friction and cheat the wind. It's pretty self-evident. And so if you don't believe me, which that's fair enough, so there's lots of studies on this kind of stuff. So for a 40 kilometre time trial, so a novice or a trained athlete, So with a novice, you obviously get more bang for buck for training because there's a law of diminishing return with everything. But if you train properly, over a 40k TT, you'll take 5.5 minutes off your time. So a trained athlete will take nearly 2 minutes and an elite one a minute. Body mass matters almost nothing when you're talking about racing on a flat road. So it's only 25 seconds or roughly 20 seconds reduction or increase in speed, reduction in time, sorry, across 40k's for reducing weight. Going up a climb, that will change obviously massively. Going from the hoods onto the drops, so you're starting to minimise aerodynamic drag here. So this is on a road bike, so you'll go from, you'll be 3.5 or nearly 4 minutes faster as a novice, 3 minutes as a trained athlete, and under 3 minutes if you're elite. And then you go flat out into the full-blown from the hoods, so sitting up high, into the optimised time trial position where you've got everything on. You'll save roughly 9.5 minutes as a novice over 40 kilometres, so that's pretty extraordinary. 7.5 minutes as a trained athlete, and even an elite athlete will get 7 minutes quicker. So they are significant numbers. It's not to be sneezed at, and aerodynamics has a heavy impact on anyone riding a bike at any time. It's what the entire sport is based around, whether it's cycling or triathlon. It is all about reducing drag because we've all got a finite amount of power, and if we can minimise our drag, we're going to go faster for less effort. And in terms of bang for buck, cost of training is almost $0, or there will be a coach's fee, obviously, if you're getting coached. Whereas if you go the full wank, as we call it, so if you get set up on a bike, if you've got the best of the best, if you're running discs, if you're doing the lot, you're talking well north of $10,000 for roughly a 10-minute time saving. So you can get half of that just by training more. So the value lies in the training, and everything comes on top of that. First things first. Righto. So where to from here? Training is the big ticket item. If you don't have the engine, you aren't going to go fast. After that, aero optimization. So as we mentioned before, 80 to 90% of effort is to overcome drag. There are two things in this complex interaction that we need to optimize. One is the person's position on the bike, which equates to roughly 75 to 80% of the drag. And then you've got your bike, which is equating to roughly 20 to 25% of drag. So again, how you manipulate your body on top of the bike is far more important than the bike you are riding. Can anyone offer an insight as to why a tri bike or a TT bike is fast? Thank you. I didn't even see who said that, but they're right. Yep, absolutely. So it's the position you can adopt on it. So there's lots of really good aero road bikes around, and you can clip aero bars onto them, and the drag numbers between an amazing bike like Damo's and Jared's and an aero road bike with clip-ons, if you just put them in a wind tunnel, it isn't that big a difference. The difference is in the way you can manipulate your body to get on the TT bike or the tri bike. So they typically have a much more upright seat post, so you are much further forward on the bike. They have a shorter top tube and they have a much lower head tube, which allows obviously your pelvis to rotate, keeping your hip angles open, and you can prop on the front of the bike. On a road bike, it is really, really difficult to do it. They're built to be ridden like that, and when you try and do this, it extends you too far, puts a lot of pressure through lower backs. It's hard to sustain that posture. So TT bikes are fantastic because of their geometry, not because of the shape of their airfoils and all this kind of stuff. That helps for sure, but at the end of the day, it's very much about the position you can adopt on the bike, not the bike you're riding. And it is almost impossible to manipulate a road bike into a position to replicate what it's like on a TT bike. So you don't have to spend squillions to get a really good TT bike. I know there's the P2s and 3s, those sorts of things. They're a relatively cheap tri bike, and you'll get 95% of the effect of being on something that's worth 8 or 9 times more. So that's what I was just explaining. So if you could halve the drag of your bike, which would be an amazing improvement, it's still only 12.5% of total drag. Whereas if you can improve your position by only a quarter, you end up reducing total drag by nearly 20%. So body position is key to this kind of stuff. Right. And this is the big one, and I haven't got it bold enough here, but this is the core to everything we do when we fit people on TT bikes. If you cannot sustain your position on the bike, it is entirely pointless having that position. If you cannot hold your posture for, if it's a 40k Olympic distance or it's a 90k half Ironman or 180k, if you can't, for the majority of that ride, sustain your posture, then your position is not right, and we either need to reassess it, which is why we love seeing people again to try and keep on tweaking these things, or you're not adapting to it well enough. So this is an example of a bad position. So that is obviously way too high in the saddle, way too high at the front, and it just looks really, really uncomfortable. And if she's not getting saddle sores and going slow, then I'll go he. That is good. Much further forward, you can see the weight's going down through the humerus, so she's effectively acting, using that as a vertical strut, which is passively holding her upper body mass. And so that allows her pelvis and hips the freedom of movement to start pedaling and pedaling with power and to hold this for the length of the time that she's wanting to do it. Righto, what can you do about it? I'm far better at spruiking other people's services than my own, but get a bike fit and do it before you buy the bike. It is really important. People will typically buy their bike and then they'll come and see us, and there is often compromises we're having to make. We can solve a lot of problems before we start. We have fit bikes here that we can get people on. We can adjust crank lengths, we can change seats in and out, we can completely alter geometries. We can then do the maths and say, righto, Paul Malin, you should be on a 56 centimetre Cervelo P2 or a specialised Shiv in this, or whatever bike you want. We can give you the appropriate size for it, and we can let you know what bars you should be on, we can let you know what seats you should be on, all of those sorts of things. It's much harder and more expensive ultimately for us to retrofit things than it is to get it done in the first place.
So you don't, just clarifying, don't buy a bike just because it's pretty?
That is a perfectly valid part of the buying equation, but probably after we've got the setup right. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, no worries. The next thing is practice. You've got to ride in this position. There is no point training sitting up on the hoods. That is not how you ride these bikes. It's not how they're built to be ridden. And if you're having to do it, you either need to spend more time in that position so that you adapt to it, because as I said before, the body is incredibly adaptable and there's no free lunch. These positions are aggressive. Even the triathlon ones where we try and minimize stress and load on the body, it is still aggressive positions. You're effectively hanging a 6 or 7 or 8 kilo object at the end of a very long slender lever like that, and then extending it so you're supporting the entire weight of your head and neck through these muscles, and then trying to use those same muscles to breathe as well as act posturally is the recipe for neck and back pain. And the only way you get better at it is to do more of it, and for us to position you in a position such that it's not going to put undue stress on your back and neck. But as I said, there is no free lunch. The very nature of these positions compromise upper back and neck function. Does that make sense? And the more you do it, within reason, the better it will get, the easier it will become. I'm a terrible time trialist. I can stand here, and I think that everyone who's seen me on a TT bike will agree. I have never ridden one except for the last 6 months, long enough to get comfortable in a TT position. I am now doing so. I used to start off doing 3 and 4 minute intervals, as in not power intervals, but as in I'm going to hold this position for 3 or 4 minutes. And then over time going, righto, next time I'm going to do 5, and I'll do 4 sets of that, and then 8, and then 10, and 12. And now I can do 25 minutes, half an hour, without really causing any undue problems for myself. It's taken a fair bit of time and effort, just because I'm middle-aged and my body is just not built to be doing these sorts of things. But over time you can get your body to adapt to it, and it takes work off the bike, which we'll touch on, but it certainly takes time on the bike to adapt to these positions. You must be riding them all the time. Sitting up on the bars and riding along is not what you do when you train. It's got to be sport specific, and sport specific is this. Have I laboured that point long enough? It's an absolute must. So work off the bike on flexibility and strength. You guys are in a really good position because you're far more functional than typical cyclists. So triathletes, because they run, so they stand upright and operate bipedally, and they swim, so you're using different muscle groups, you actually alter the stress on your body really nicely, so you're more functional and stronger than a typical cyclist is. But it's really important to continue doing things off the bike to manage your body so that you function well on the bike. So flexibility and strength training, it's pretty straightforward. I'll take you through a very quick series of key stretches later on, but really it's 10% of your training time. If you're training 10 hours a week, 10% of it should be self-management. So stretching, these little beasts should be your best friend. So spiky balls, foam rollers, fantastic tools for self-management. I know that osteos and physios are condescending and annoying, and we ask whether you've done your exercises, and we're manipulative and all those sorts of things. So if you don't want to come and see people like us, then get these. I think 30 or 40 bucks, 20 bucks, they are an absolute lifesaver, particularly for the way we contort our bodies and the amount of time we're using them. Any questions about that? Select appropriate equipment for you. Noseless saddles have changed the game with triathlon, and if you're not on one, on a time trial bike or a triathlon bike, then you're causing yourself, you're probably impeding your performance. You're almost certainly damaging genitalia, which is not great. Basically, these things are designed so that you hook your pubic rami, so not your sit bones, but a bit further forward of that. You hook them on these prongs and you rotate your genitals off the front so that there's no direct contact, pretty much. It allows you to anteriorly tilt your pelvis so that when your pelvis goes that way, it basically allows your hips to function more freely and more openly, so you can generate power in a more meaningful way because you're not putting your glutes on stretch and you're not compressing anterior hip structures. So they absolutely change the way you should ride a bike, or that you can ride these bikes. I cannot advocate enough. There is no position on earth that is worth compromising or damaging your genitals for. So that's the one golden rule in bike fitting. If you're getting numbness or genital trauma, then you need to stop and change something. So these things completely change the way you interact on the bike and the position you can hold and maintain on a bike. Absolutely key. I'm a big advocate of short cranks. The reason being, the limiting factor with almost everyone's position on a time trial bike is how flexed they can get their hip. So when you're down like this and you bring your knee up to the top of the pedal stroke, you're compressing structures in here, and if you're even remotely like me, you're going to be tight and short through glutes and hip flexors. And so as you come over the top, you're basically putting yourself in a biomechanically compromised position because you can't generate meaningful force at the top of your pedal stroke. And subsequently, you can annoy the front of your hips, you can annoy your lower back because your pelvis will start rocking and rolling to get over the top of that pedal stroke. And having a shorter crank effectively means your knee doesn't come as high at top dead center, we call it, at the top of your pedal stroke. Really, there is no downside to them, pretty much. People talk about, there's a loss of power and all this kind of thing. It has categorically been shown that that doesn't happen between roughly 145 mil cranks to 180 to 185 mil cranks. Certainly people anecdotally feel uncomfortable on them. I've been swapping people to short cranks for 6 or 7 years. I've only had one guy who couldn't tolerate them, he just didn't like the feel. So that was fine, we swapped them back and away he went. But yes, short cranks are very important for people's hip function, and particularly you guys, because you're getting off and trying to run afterwards. So when you're jamming your hips into full flexion again and again and again, and you shorten your hip flexors and you try and stand up and run, it's very hard to do so. And you need that transition to be nice and smooth from the bike to the run. And aero extensions as well. So different people's wrists prefer different things. I'm a massive fan of ski tips. They put the wrist in a neutral position. Again, whatever your flavour is, go crazy. But there is some data to suggest that ski tips are probably better than the other choices from an aerodynamic perspective. But again, that's probably too nebulous to really hang your hat on.
Excuse my naivety, I don't know what that means.
Basically, ski tips have been shown to be faster.
Is that what that is?
That is, sorry, yes, yeah. So these tips here,
Sorry.
as opposed to the flat ones and S-bends and all those sorts of things. So the theory being, we're effectively a blunt object trying to go through the wind. Having your hands like that, it reduces drag through your forearm but opens up your chest more. Ski tips effectively, initially they hit more of the wind, but they start moving the wind before it hits a larger object. So you're effectively dirtying the air before it hits this large surface area. And that was what we were talking about before, about how trying to change the way that air interacts with you. Everybody is different, so don't try and be like Jan Frodeno. Sustainability is the king on a bike. If you can't hold your position, it's wrong. Or you haven't worked hard enough at it, one of the two things. Power production is the queen. We like people to be able to sustain the power that they've got. There is often a slight compromise when you get on a TT bike, just because of the posture you adopt and the fact that there is a metabolic cost to supporting that much of your body weight through your upper limb. And when you're going quickly, often that loss of 5 or 10 watts on a time trial bike is more than offset by the fact that the drag reduction allows you to go faster. Drag is the joker in the pack. We cannot quantify it. We can't sit there. There's models now you can run where you take a frontal photo and calculate things off frontal surface areas and things like that. I don't have access to it. I haven't purchased it. How good they are, I don't know. You can certainly go to Melbourne to Disc and you can run laps of the velodrome where they control everything. It's very expensive, but that will certainly show you your drag numbers. Or you can go to a wind tunnel again, which is prohibitively expensive. So as I said, TT positions come at a metabolic cost because we're compromising upper body function to be in that position and ultimately respiration. And roughly 12% of your metabolic activity at threshold is associated with breathing. So when you're using muscles to hold your posture that could be changing the shape of your rib cage, then you're going to have a reduction in efficiency, which over time is going to reduce your power somewhat, but it should be minimal. We want to maintain power as much as we can. And what we do is we fit for the known. We don't know what drag is, so we don't make changes based on whether it might have good drag effects. And you must be relaxed. Having a death grip on the bars reduces efficiency because there's a metabolic cost to doing that as well. And it's a sign that you're probably not overly comfortable. Things we do know about aero or aero positions. Nothing is slower than an ill-fitting TT bike. When you see someone out on TT courses sitting up, they're like a windsock. It's worse than being on a road bike. So basically, that's why we talk about sustainability being king. If it's not comfortable and you can't sustain it, it's not right. Think about where you break your time trial position. If we go back to that graph about how quickly wind resistance starts ramping up as velocity increases, there's good and bad places to eat and drink in a triathlon. Going fast is not a good time to drink or eat. If you sit up to do so at 40 k's an hour, your speed is going to drop massively. If you sit up going up a rise at 20 k's an hour, the impact on your speed is going to be dramatically less. Think about where you eat and drink. It's also a good chance to stretch your back, stretch everything, move it around. The body craves variation. We're dictating that it maintains one posture for a length of time. It doesn't love it. There's no golden rules. Aerodynamics are far too complex, as I said. But if there were golden rules, the top three probably are: stable and smooth is fast, rocking and rolling is dirty. If you see someone going like this on a bike, they're not going as fast as they should be. Keep your pelvis stable, your upper body stable. Moving parts are slow. Anyone for a drink?
Got beer on tap too. Don't be shy.
Jace, you're in a very good position to be getting into that beer right now. It's not a good market for beer, is it? Triathletes? No, or cyclists? Cheap market.
Eat the food.
And smooth is not just smooth in terms of your upper body action. Smooth pedaling. If you peak and spike your power, it is very fatiguing. You want to have, it's called variability index, but you want to have a very, very flat application of power throughout your ride. You do not want to be stomping. If you're stomping, you are going to prematurely fatigue yourself. smooth, smooth, smooth. And you look at all the good guys, it almost looks effortless. They are just spinning along. It is beautiful to see. So ski tips, as I said before, and apparently separating the base bar and your bar extensions. So for any given position, you can get there two ways. You can have your base bar come up and have your extensions on top, or you can have your base bar down low and separated from your extensions. And basically having a separation there is faster than having them both stuck together. It's just cleaner air going through, because pillars are more aerodynamic than having a mess sitting on top of your base bar. So it lets both foils do their job rather than cluttering and dirtying air. Any questions to this point? We'll finish up soon because people will be getting bored. You've optimised training, diet, sleeping, and now you want to spend some cash. What should you spend it on? Where would you start? Anyone?
New bike.
Clearly a new bike. Yep. Skin suit is probably the biggest and cheapest one. So wrinkles are really costly. As I said, 370 watt. I meant on your skin suit. 370 watts is half a horsepower. As I said, there's probably one bloke in this room who would go close to having that. So the rest of us are well under, we're probably closer to a quarter of a horsepower. So simple things like wrinkles in jerseys really slow you up. It sounds insipid, but it's true. So any wrinkle you've got in your suit is going to slow you down. If you've ever seen a proper skin suit, a time trial suit, so it's not what you would wear in a triathlon because it's just too, like you can't stand up straight in one, they're that tight. But you pick it up and it looks like a child's garment. And people routinely tear them, so the zips are often busted and broken, and they have to stand almost in this position to be able to, well, they can't stand up because there's too much tension on the garment. It is sheer, and I cannot stress how sheer it actually is. Yes, so skin suits are super important. Aero helmets, absolutely. Booties matter. Yep, so they definitely do. I'll get to the graphic in a minute actually. Bike, the frame, the geometry of TT bikes is obviously the big one purely because of the position you can get in. The other one, I've jumped ahead slightly, power meter. I banged on about power before. It is an absolute, for triathlon, training and racing, I cannot stress enough, if it's $500 for a Stages or a Garmin Vector, I'm not sure what they are, you will get more value from that than almost any other purchase you'll make. It objectively quantifies training load, as in, are you overtraining? It objectively quantifies pace, it quantifies fitness. It is just, it's the number we all should be working to. So I've banged on about that long enough. There's a bucket load of variations of them. They're getting cheaper all the time. They're getting better. Yeah, power's where it's at. Indoor trainers too. I know that there's been a lot of people with kickers and hammers and all sorts of things coming out of here. Indoor training is a really effective use of your time. It's really efficient. It's a good way to get used to your TT position too. And for racing, because you're not drafting someone, because there is no requirement to go with a bunch in triathlon at the level we race at, again, excluding Jared probably, you just need to be looking at your numbers. If someone comes past you, who cares? You need to be focused on what you're doing, not on what they're doing. Stay smooth, as I said before. So with pacing and power meters, again, we can objectively quantify how hard you should be going. So if you leave time on the course, that's disappointing. If you go too hard, that's race ending. You end up walking or at the very least running really badly. So you'll save 2 minutes on the bike and it'll cost you 15 or 10 on the run. It's not a good outcome. And all of this stuff is online. It is very easy to find, but basically for a half Ironman, you operate roughly at 80 to 85% of your FTP. For a longer course, it drops down to 60, high 60s, low 70s. For a sprint, you're going basically flat out. And an Olympic, it's just under your threshold. But realistically, if you've got a power meter, you absolutely have a number to follow. If you've done enough of this for long enough, and Damien Gillard's a classic. He does not ride with a power meter. I would almost put my house on the fact that Damo absolutely hits these numbers anyway. He has raced for decades. He knows exactly what he's doing. It's highly unusual for someone to be that cued into what their body can and can't do. And again, with respect to Damo, and I've had this conversation with him, I still think he should be using a power meter. Righto. Any queries about that? And even beyond that, so they're gross averages across a course, but there's ways you can apply power throughout the event that will maximise speed and minimise fatigue. And there's an app actually called Best Bike Split. I'm not sure if anyone's found it, but it is really good. You basically put in your FTP, put in your drag numbers, or you estimate them. You put in a data file of of the course you're going to race on, like Allen's Flat or Port Macquarie, and it will spit out, not quite kilometre by kilometre, but pretty bloody close, exactly what power you should be hitting at each point on that course. It's really specific and it's really good. And again, it reduces any of that interpretation, that rate of perceived exertion, that overexcitement. So this is something that was published widely a couple of years ago. So roughly over a 40k time trial, I'll go through it very quickly. A minute and a bit with a full-blown aero helmet. Skin suit is roughly 2 minutes, so a full-blown proper skin suit. So tri-suits and a normal speed suit, for example, will be less than that, but still significant. Going to the wind tunnel is another minute. Again, that's expensive. Getting in an aero position and changing aero bars and those sorts of things, obviously significant, 2 minutes I think. Aero frame is only 20 seconds. A disc is 45 seconds. You should be going on the front too, the deepest wheel you can tolerate. I think that we've got a good selection from Reynolds here. Most people go possibly too shallow because they're being a bit conservative. I think that people getting blown around is a bit overstated through their front wheel, and a disc will almost never knock you off because it's at the back. But the deeper you can go at the front, the better. In a filthy crosswind, you would change that because you've got to feel comfortable and stable and not wrestle the bike. But the new wheels these days have got much better shapes to cope with crosswinds. So the days of having to go back to 20 and 30 mil deep wheels on a windy day are almost behind us. You'd be looking at 40 mil minimum and anything up to 80 or 90 if you're good enough and fast enough. But definitely in filthy crosswinds, you can feel it, but I often believe that that's a bit overstated too. Any comments on that?
There's obviously a safety factor that goes with that, like you say, and the compromise between 80 or 90 drop back to a 40 or 50. If it means you're not on your ass down the road, then it's what?
Yep. And you're not going to get double the effect from going from a 40 to an 80. But again, the deeper the better typically. And I'm not responsible for anyone going out and getting blown off either. So
What about the head style wheels?
the 3 spokes?
Yeah, the 3 spokes, and have I seen the 2 spoke come out?
Yeah, there is.
Coming out?
My understanding with the 3 spokes is they were only good over about 45k an hour.
Can I get some data on that?
Yes.
So I work for a company that does a lot of, well, we get a lot of the aerodynamic data. I'm with Reynolds, so it is slightly biased. They don't do a 3-spoke. The 3 spokes are awesome if you have a very specific frame tailing that aero wheel. So it's designed that the wind goes onto the aero frame. So if those two match, they're
2
awesome.
minutes?
If they don't match, it's actually
Maybe.
worse than having just a standard spoke wheel on there. So you've got to be very careful with the frame that you use with those wheels. The second part of it is that the commentary is 100% correct. You also got to be a little
That'd
bit
be good.
aware if you haven't got the ability to have multiple depths in carbon wheels, then, and you're racing a mix of courses, say you're doing the Gatorade series down in Melbourne and the half Ironman in Shepparton, you might be able to ride a 90 on the front in Shepparton, but if it's a windy day down at the Gatorade series, you're not going to be able to use that wheel, so you just need to keep that in mind. If you're only purchasing one set of wheels, it's probably best, especially if you're a smaller rider, you tend to get buffeted around a bit more, not to go a 90 on the front if you're only buying one set of wheels.
Thank you, Murray. Jared?
Train with it.
Yeah.
There's no point having a really nice set of wheels and then wheels or should I run on training wheels? If it's a windy day here in town, like, if you've got nicer wheels, see if you can handle it, see if you're comfortable on your bike. And because half the time you get buffeting around a bit, but it's not actually a bad thing. You can relax and ride through it, but it's more you're crapping yourself because you've never done it before, because you put your wheels in the night before.
Train as you play. Yep.
Yeah, and there's no point in having really nice wheels sitting in the shed to ride 90 k's a year.
Yep. And there's no point having a nice TT bike and training like this to try and race like that. It's not going to happen. And then that's just a nice little one going into how much per second, how many dollars per second. I think the winner was skin suit, aero bars, shoe covers. Anyway, if anyone wants that, I'll email it to them. But you would not be using shoe covers in a triathlon, clearly.
You'd
So
lose,
how
you'd
much
lose
would that
12 minutes
data
just putting them
change?
on.
Yes, you would.
How much do you think that data would change with, say, tri shoes with the holes in it? So you got air flowing through that? Would that?
I think a bigger issue with tri shoes is often the amount of support in them. Like they're not, I'm a bit of an advocate for people wearing good road shoes during something like an Ironman or half Ironman, just because the length of time you're riding is going to be, like, people get a lot of problems in tri shoes just because they're very unstable and they're very soft uppers, and there's a loss of efficiency, and often they're not carbon soled and people get hot spots and all sorts of things. So anything over probably, well, over an Olympic distance, I think it's probably worth just getting in your road shoes and going with that. But in terms of, I couldn't speculate on aerodynamic drag of a tri shoe versus something else. I'm not sure.
We do Northwave shoes as well, so I'll throw in their two box work. It's not necessarily correct, but their testing showed that in an Olympic triathlon, wearing triathlon shoes saved 90 seconds, but it factored in the transition. So it factored in the putting on the shoes and having shoe covers on to reduce the aerodynamic drag of for a track shoe.
It's got to, like, getting in and out of them, obviously the transition is beyond me. That's a really specific skill set. That's quite unique, and clearly getting in and out of shoes quickly is paramount, and I can't imagine over the course of 40 kilometres you are ever going to reduce enough drag by getting aero shoes or road shoes or booties is going to offset the time taken to fumble around and get in them. So I wouldn't overthink shoe selection in that respect for those shorter ones. Triathlon time trialling myths. Low is not always fast. There's a metabolic cost to being low. I think, and I hope Cadell's not watching my Facebook live debut today, but I always thought Cadell's position was way too low. You look at Wiggins, he brings his bike up to himself and he drops into it and relaxes into it, and his shoulder blades are nice and retracted. You look at Cadell's position, he used to be very upright in his body and like that, and it looked really uncomfortable, and I'm sure he had lots of good people giving him advice, and what Cadell can do is very different to what you and I can do, but basically don't fixate on being low. We don't know that it's faster because we don't have a wind tunnel. We do know that it compromises people, or can compromise people's comfort and their ability to sustain their posture, which we know is bad. So we fit for the known, not the unknown. There is a myth that higher tyre pressures are fast. They are if you're on a velodrome, if you're on a perfectly smooth surface. We don't race on perfectly smooth surfaces. Vibrations are very fatiguing. They don't make the bike handle well, and people often pump up tyres to the detriment of their comfort, particularly their contact points. Backsides, feet and hands hate vibration, so don't overinflate. The latest stuff I've seen says basically there's almost no loss of, or an insignificant amount of loss of rolling resistance below about 75 psi. So people going over 100, if you're 100 kilos, fair enough, look at maybe 100 psi. Anyone under 100 kilos should be nowhere near 100 psi. It's not required, it vibrates, it makes the bike hard to control, and it's uncomfortable. People think long, slow kilometres are junk. If you've got the time, they're great, because lots of good physiological adaptations happen with consistent mileage. Again, speak to coaches about this kind of stuff, but utilisation of fat as a fuel source and active recovery and all sorts of good things can happen with riding long and slow. One product is faster than any other. They're all person specific. So one TT helmet might test faster in a wind tunnel on John Smith, but you're not John Smith. You don't know how it's going to test on you. Very famous example of Craig Alexander using a 4 or 5 year old version of a Specialized helmet when he was sponsored by Specialized, because it was a faster helmet for him than the new Specialized one was. So just because someone's wearing it doesn't make it faster, and because you don't know which one's going to be faster on you, because none of us have got wind tunnels, pick the one that you like the colour of and is more comfortable and has, you know, lets air through and all that kind of stuff. Don't, and this might sound a bit bizarre coming from me, bike fit systems do not have the answer. They are all data capture systems, including the stuff we use here and what anyone else uses. The type of system someone uses to set you up does not matter. It is the person doing the analysis that matters. Data capture is one thing, data analysis another. And yes, there's no free lunches. There's no fast way to get fast. All right. My top tips: position is crucial. It must be sustainable, not just fast. I've said it twice because it's that big a tip. You must be able to hold your position. If you can't, it is wrong for you or you need to adapt to it. Give your body the best chance possible. Train as you are going to race. Stretch, strengthen. There is free speed and it's called self-management. Be smart with your efforts during training and on race day. Power meters provide fantastic objective data to maximise outcomes, and that's what we're all trying to get, is the most for the least effort. Power meters will assist with that. Cleanliness is next to godliness. You can lose roughly 7 watts in a dirty or old drivetrain. So keep your bike clean. Okay, that'll do for now, I think. Everyone's had enough of me. Any questions?
Jason, you want to say something there? No? No question?
How crucial is strength training and stretching to preventing injury?
Well, as an osteo, we think very. The repetitious nature of what triathletes do means that they load certain structures again and again and again in the same way. The body loves variation. It doesn't like doing the same thing over and over. So when you do that, you're prone to overuse injuries, basically. There's always the chance of a traumatic injury associated with falling off and that kind of stuff. But for what you guys do, typically it's overuse stuff. Stress fractures, tendinitises, those sorts of things. You get a lot of muscle imbalances, so particularly tight through hip flexors, particularly weak through glutes and lateral hip stabilisers as well, which ends up giving ITB issues and all those sorts of things. So incredibly important to maintain strength and control. And the key with those things that we spoke about before, whether it's my elbow, Jared's dry needles or Ross's manipulation, is all about trying to change the tissue. When you traumatise a tissue often enough, it becomes dysfunctional. So it won't fire at the right time, or it won't fire particularly strongly, or you'll use it beyond its tolerance and you'll get injured. So when we start digging in and poking and prodding, what we're trying to do is increase range of movement, increase coordination, neuromuscular activation of those muscles so that you're not having lags in hip stabilisers and those sorts of things. And yeah, just trying to offset or reverse, minimise the impact that your training is having on your body so that it can continue to function well. Is that a valid answer to the health professionals in the room?
I guess, look at strength training as like your basic unit in that, like as Tom said, 300 watts isn't a lot to do one off, but to do it for a long period of time is a lot. So to actually develop it over a long period of time, you need to have a pretty solid base to actually work off. So if you can, if your maximum is 310 watts that you can produce, being able to produce 300 for 2 hours is going to be pretty hard. If you can produce 800 watts, then 300 watts for 2 hours is much more manageable, I guess. So it's kind of the basic pyramid, you just work up from there.
And I use the pretty rugged analogy of not being able to fire a cannon from a canoe. So if you think about trying to fire a cannon from a canoe, it's going to tip over. And so it's the same with your pelvis and your lower back. If you're trying to generate 300 watts, you've got to resist that movement somewhere. And if your pelvis is unstable because your position is wrong, or you're weak, or you're not firing properly, then you're going to start rocking and rolling. So number one is it's inefficient, and you're probably going to get saddle sores and other issues. But number two is that, you're certainly wasting energy. So yes, you need really good stability on a bike to go well. Anyone rocking and rolling and humping on a bike they're not going fast, or they could be going faster.
Part of that variability with training as well is any strength training outside of cycling. It's not so bad for triathletes because you have variability, but especially for cyclists, we work in a very repetitive and small range of motion again and again and again. And working outside of that, especially with strength training, will recruit more muscle fibre than you would otherwise, helping prevent that.
And it's the same with running, same with cycling, same with anything. Any other questions?
Just with the tipless saddles, they're kind of all similar in look, but obviously there's totally different, one size doesn't fit everybody.
Yep.
But it'll come down to fit and test as well.
Absolutely.
Are they available in test saddles just like lots of other saddles come in the varied colours for testing? Or you have to spend $300 to work out if it's right or not?
We no longer do test saddles because we couldn't work out a system to get them back, basically. We lost heaps of them, even getting people's numbers and all sorts of stuff. What we do have is our return policy, which is printed up behind the counter 4 by 2 meters there. Our return policy is called Satisfaction Guaranteed, so you can purchase anything in the store and bring it back for any reason within any time frame. We'll give you whatever resolution you want. So you can buy the saddle for $400, ride it for 12 months and decide it doesn't work, we'll give you a refund. That goes with bikes, helmets, shoes, whatever. We've had people bring back, I think 2 weeks ago, somebody brought back a $4,000 bike because they didn't like it. They wanted a bike with more travel. We've gone fine, gave him a refund, and he turned around and bought a bike with more travel, which was here nor there. We just want people to be satisfied with what they purchase and actually use it. There's no benefit for us if people buy a saddle and then still don't ride their bike because they're still uncomfortable. So if the saddle's $300, spend $300, use it as much as you want. If you decide it's not right, bring it back.
I've seen them do it. It surprised me too. We use a pressure map in what we do too, so it shows exactly where you're applying and how much pressure on the seat. You will know almost immediately if a seat doesn't work for you, but so you'll go, right, that clearly doesn't work for me, and then we put another one on, you can tolerate that, and so that's when you start going, right, well, I'll probably have a look at that one. So we can rule saddles out pretty much straight away. Ruling them in, you need to be riding them, and it's a real challenge. That I used to have saddles at work, and I can't tell you the number I lost, thousands of dollars worth, just because that's the way the world is, and we weren't good enough at note keeping. But Jared was, yep.
I know one of your saddles too.
Yeah. So anyway, so yes, we definitely have techniques to look at how the saddle is going to work for you. Saddles are always a problem. It's probably it's the most difficult thing we work with people on bikes, and it has such a big impact on how they ride. If a saddle doesn't fit, or you're using like a single nosed one, the old tri saddles used to be a pretty traditional saddle with a fat nose, and you would perch your perineum on it, which is basically between your anus and your testicles for men. It's really hard on that area, and it's not particularly helpful long term for people's function. Actually, Ross, who works with us, did his master's on this, so he's far better qualified. We probably don't have time to speak about it in full depth, but it is a really specific area of dysfunction. And it completely changes the posture you can have on the bike. So if you've got to sit with a flat pelvis because you're crushing your genitals, you'll end up having that big cat curl in your back, whereas what you should be doing is rolling your pelvis down like that into a much more neutral spinal posture, which, it's far more sustainable and comfortable.
Can I ask a question? Just for the purpose of what you do with bike fittings, like I'm really quite new to the sport, and I've just got pretty much an A-level roadie with some pink handlebars. If I come to you and said, right, I need you to fit this bike better to my body, is it still possible to do it as well as someone that comes in with a bike that's worth thousands of dollars?
Yep.
Because obviously money is a massive issue for people that are new to the sport, whether they want to continue with it long term as well.
It's really hard because the more money you spend, the better stuff is and the more comfortable it can be.
Yep.
But certainly with bikes, the shape of your bike will be exactly the same geometry, give or take, to what's on a $8,000 one. It's just that materials are different. So you can certainly get good positions on cheaper bikes. Is that an answer to that question?
Yes.
Yeah. And one of the first things we do when we bike fit someone is talk to them about what their expectations are. Are they trying to win the World Championships, or are they trying to ride comfortably for 20 Ks 4 times a week? And the demands on the body are very different, and subsequently the position are very different.
Okay, thank you.
And that's one point I actually tell most people, I can tell Justine, when you go see Tom, go in with your expectations of how you want to be set up on your bike. So if you want to be a time trialer, go in and say, I want you to set me up as a time trial. Tom will talk to you and give you the feedback that you need and give you the best possible fit up. Be kind of honest with what you want when you go in there, and it'll save Tom time and you time, and then you'll get the result that you want from the bike fit.
And we don't know about it if you don't tell us.
With my bike fit, I have got an extremely unfunctional bike for what I want to do on it, but Tom did a really good job of making it as functional as it possibly could be. Is that the best way to put it?
That's a very nice thing to say, thank you.
He made it as functional as it could possibly be for what I wanted to do. But having said that, my bike is really pretty. It is.
Did you give Tom a finger like a finger?
Yeah, I did when he upped the watts meter.
Okay, I've said enough. I think Jake's got someone else who can contribute something.
Just a couple more minutes, guys. Thanks for Tom for all your info. A couple quick housekeeping notes. We've obviously got food, which everybody should be getting into if they feel so inclined. I'm getting a really bad name around town for taking forever to finish a keg. So there's 2 kegs there, and if everyone could help me, Bridge Road are like, you guys still draining that thing? So 2 different types of beer on tap. Got 2 more people that would like to quickly say a couple things. They're not going to be the main event. Mayweather here. So I've got Brent from Iron Lights Athletics, who has a gym down in South Albury, who just wanted to talk about an idea for another info night we're thinking about doing in a few weeks' time. And then Murray from Bike Sports up the back, who's brought all the Laser, Northwave, Reynolds, Tri-Specific stuff. He's not going to spend heaps of time going through his product, but he's brought a few specials and offers, and we understand it's getting on in the night and everybody wants to go home. So he's developed a bit of a plan as to how you can come back in the shop for the next couple of weeks and still access his products at the reduced prices. So
Has everyone entered the power meter thing?
yeah, and then that's the other thing, the little box on the table there with a Sharpie and a bit of paper, put your name on it and we'll draw it live on Facebook later on, or we'll even do it tonight if everybody's still here by the time all the names get in it. So if you want to start and just pass it around the table. So that's Tom spotted a door prize of a Stages power meter. They're not $500, they retail for about $1,000. Really cool little units. They sync up with all your GPSs through Bluetooth and Ant Plus. So, and we can basically get one to fit everyone's bike. So really functional little tools.
Yeah.
So here's Brent.
Thanks, Jake. So I'll be very short and sweet tonight. We're really just kind of putting the feelers out for a little bit of interest and see how much interest there is for another night like this, where we can speak a little further about running, so the running side of things, which is my background, and then what I do now, more so the strength and if you will, mobility, all the accessory work that we could be doing, maybe more of what we're doing that would tie into the sort of work that you're doing with Tom and Jerry and so on. So long story short, I've got a gym now. I'm interested in powerlifting. I do some gymnastic stuff. We do some mobility work, and a lot of that is about maximising our range of motion and our strength throughout a range. So when you jump on the bike, one of the things that came up towards the end there was that throughout your triathlon, whether it's the swim, run, or swim, bike, or run, you're in a very linear path. So everything's happening in a straight line. Obviously, there's a little bit of rotation at joints, but it's a very repetitive movement through a very limited or very constant range. So one of our focuses in the work that we do with people, whether they are one of those 3 domains or triathletes, is about moving outside of those ranges. So maximising your range, looking at moving in different planes, whether that's rotational stuff because we are in a very straight line for a lot of the time, and then also maximising our strength both within and without of those ranges. So one of the things that was a bit of a constant theme then was your max effort. So I believe I liked what Tom and Jerry said about kind of shooting a cannon from a canoe and being able to exert that maximum force. So that's things like a back squat, whether it's a box squat, which is short in range, or things like a box step down, which is looking at if you can get your hip to your heel and then still being able to press out of that point and then eventually adding weight to that. So that's kind of the strength side of things and the mobility side of things. Things that we maybe don't address in our normal gym program, where you're going in and you've got a bit of a back and buys program and so on. The other side of things that I'm keen to speak about would be the running side of things. So before I was involved in the gym,
tell everyone how good you were.
Yeah, I was mediocre at best. No, so
everyone here is dust.
yeah, so I've done quite a bit of running. I was a track runner, 800s and 1500s, and then some cross country stuff up to about 10 or 15k. A normal training week for me, though, the kind of school of training that I bought into was pretty significant mileage. So for about 175 weeks, I consistently hit 100k weeks, which is the sort of mileage that if you're going to be running or hitting up an Olympic distance triathlon is pretty typical. But within a triathlon application, if you're going to be running 10Ks, I'm really keen to speak further about how that differs. Your requirements in training differ from maybe just someone who is just running 10K as opposed to in conjunction with your swim and your bike, and how our technique comes into play with that. Triathletes have a very particular running style, largely because they're much stronger than runners, someone who's purely running, because of the swimming and bike work that they're doing. So generally that kind of shows up in a more developed posterior chain, and they're very upright, and they've got broader shoulders than someone who's just running a 10K, or stronger shoulders, and that obviously impacts their technique and can sometimes lead to a bit of a lack of efficiency, and that's something that I can hopefully address with you. Cool. So like I say, we're really just putting the feelers out there tonight, and if you'd please stay tuned to Cycle Station and maybe even my gym page, we can keep you informed of when we'll be going ahead with that. Alright, thank you. Cheers.
Got Murray from Bike Sports, the fabulous.
I'm going to be even shorter. I've got a bunch of products here tonight. I just tried to bring down a bunch of products that would give you guys maximum time gains for the least money possible. We obviously don't
Carbon wheels.
Yeah, carbon wheels. We obviously don't do everything, but there's just some options there for like as low as $30. You can make some really significant time gains on your bike. These are going to be here for the next month. So if you've got any questions or commentary, I'm sure that Tom can handle it all. But any questions, just feel free to ask. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks everyone. Hang around. I'm going to be here for a couple of hours doing stuff. So if you want to drink and eat and chat and whatever, feel free to kick around. But don't forget to put your name in the box.
Have you got napkins?
Yes. I'll sort that out
That'd
for
be
you.
great.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Can you please help me?
Yeah.
Out of a jam. Do you want to turn that off, can you keep it somehow? Wouldn't? I don't think so. No. It's all